Tell you what is going on in Australia has become a scandal in America. I mean, our lockdowns, laws demanding workers get vaccinated, the violent policing in Victoria that had yesterday's protesters in New York so upset they held a noisy demonstration outside our consulate demanding that the US never allow what they're seeing here in Australia.
What's going on in Australia is not just going to be Australia. And when it shows up on our doorsteps, we're going to punch it right in the teeth.
I was joined a short while ago by Sky News US correspondent Annelise Nielsen, and I asked her, how did this protest start?
Well, it's a tricky one to dig into, especially because I didn't get the chance to go down there myself. But it seems like this is a group that's been going around New York repeatedly protesting against mandatory vaccines. That's been rolling out in the US at a greater frequency than it has in the past. Now it's been given the green light by the government. They've started seeing it come through for frontline workers, that kind of thing. But what this was really interesting in showing is how Australia is becoming a focal point for a lot of the anti-vaccination, anti-mandatory vaccination movement in the United States. Because at this protest, it does seem like they ended up outside the consulate in New York, and there doesn't appear to be a large number of Australians in this group necessarily, although again, I didn't have the chance to speak to them, and there's any chance there were quite a few Australians in there. But what this does show is that Australia has become a real talking point in the US. And I've found that even myself, that people have started bringing up the lockdowns in Australia, the extended lockdowns in Australia, and the fact that the actual vaccine numbers don't seem to be moving that. And it's something that Americans are finding it really hard to wrap their head around. And we're starting to see the discussion happen a lot more, especially on right-wing media sites. And this has put us as a focal point.
Yeah, I noticed the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has already had a whack at Australia, likening it to communist China. The violence here as well that seems to have made an impact. We're becoming a bit of a horror story in the US, it seems.
Yeah, and I know this is something Australians have a really hard time wrapping their head around, because they've seen the deaths in the United States and they think it's just been an absolute horror show here. But for a lot of people, their lives have gone on like normal. We see 700,000 deaths, but it is a country of 320 million people. And at this point, most people have had COVID themselves. They know someone that's had it. And even if they do know someone that's had it, they might have been elderly, and so it didn't quite have the same impact as some of the younger deaths that we see get a lot of coverage in the media, and especially outside of the US. Here, there's plenty happening in the meantime, so things have moved on. But people bring it up with me. I was doing a story about volunteers getting donations together for Afghanistan, and I was speaking to some Afghan refugees, and they asked me about what's happening in Australia and said that they were pretty horrified by some of the police actions there. And it's kind of, it caught me by surprise, but this is coming up a lot more in general conversation. Those videos do travel, and people don't expect this of Australia. They thought that everything was quite calm and reasonable. They didn't realise the extent of the lockdowns, how long they've been, how strict they've been, and especially trying to explain to most Americans who are fairly libertarian the concept of these kind of lockdowns. They just can't wrap their head around it.
I tell you what, if vision of what's happening here is horrifying even refugees from Afghanistan, then we really do have a problem. Annelise, I talked earlier about the fuel crisis in Britain and in China, the electricity shortages, the soaring gas prices, coal now being in hot demand again. How is all this affecting politics for Joe Biden, who seems in a world of pain?
He is in a world of pain. He's got a few things that have all piled up at exactly the same time that really means his legacy is on the line, because he came in saying he was going to revolutionize American infrastructure, that this was going to be a once-in-a-generation package. And a big part of that was climate change action, because as he said today, this isn't necessarily the progressives in the party pushing that line. He is quite strong on that himself, but he knows that he needs the progressives over the line. They have the 50-50 split in the Senate, and Kamala Harris acts as the tiebreaker, so they can afford to have one Democrat offside, but right now they have two. One of those is from Arizona, but the one that's really a headache for Joe Biden is Joe Manchin. Now, he's from West Virginia. That is coal country. They don't want big action on climate change, anything that would jeopardize that kind of future for coal country. They don't want to hear about it. And Joe Manchin knows that. And so this is where this has all really come to a head. Oil prices are fluctuating. They've been really sporadic right throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. But many analysts say, look, the prices right now aren't that far off what we had in 2018. What's unlikely to change here, though, is the banking and finance sector's opinion of what they should be financing. And they're really not wanting to invest anymore in things that aren't clean energy. That's where we're going to start seeing those pressure points coming. So this is why we're seeing this big push, big divide within the Democrats. And that's the challenge that Joe Biden has. It's the one thing that's going to upend his legislative promises, not the Republicans. And they all know they're running out of time before midterm elections. And that's when they could see the House numbers completely changed. And that would take any chance of Joe Biden being able to pass any legislation this big completely off the table.
I think Manchin's making a good point, though. It's the one that should have been asked in Britain. It's all very well to say green policies, but what if you do run short of gas and the fossil fuels that you need to keep the economy going? So we shall see where that ends up. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much indeed for your time.